Smoke rose from Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis late yesterday as people inside the complex attempted to clear rubble following an Israeli airstrike which killed 5 people. The dead included a Hamas political leader, Palestinian medics and Hamas said. Israel said it had targeted a key figure in the militant group. The Gaza Health Ministry said the strike hit the surgery department at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The Israeli military said its attack followed extensive intelligence and used precise munitions to minimize harm at the site. Hamas said a member of its political office, Ismail Bahoum, had been killed. Israel's defense ministry, Israel Katz, confirmed the target was Bahoum. The military did not name the target, which it described only as a terrorist in Hamas. Hamas's Al-Aqsa TV said that Bahoum was being treated at the hospital for wounds sustained in a previous attack. Israel says that Hamas systematically embeds in hospitals, schools and shelters, which the group denies. We plead for protection at least in the hospital, said Mohammed Fuju, a Palestinian man accompanying a patient inside the hospital. Palestinian officials on Sunday put the death toll from nearly 18 months of conflict at over 50,000. Israel launched its offensive in Gaza after Hamas fighters stormed southern Israel on October 7, 2023, killing 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking more than 250 hostages, according to Israeli figures.
انضرب صاروخ مباشر على الدور الثاني من مبنى الياسين مبنى الطوارئ. هذا الصاروخ كان مباشر على قسم جراحة رجال، وكما ترون أن المبنى القسم قد دمر تدميرا كاملا، وتم نقل 90% من المرضى بحالة سليمة ووجود شهداء وإصابات في هذا المكان.
بالقصف اليوم على مجمع ناصر الطبي وإخراج قسم الجراحة عن الخدمة هي رسالة من الاحتلال لإخراج مجمع ناصر الطبي عن الخدمة. أستطيع القول أن مجمع ناصر الطبي هو أحد المستشفيات أو أكبر مستشفى حاليا عامل في قطاع غزة. قد تم إعادة تشغيل مجمع ناصر الطبي في مايو من العام السابق بعد خروجه عن الخدمة، بعد مرور ما يقارب أو أكثر من 500 يوم على العدوان على قطاع غزة، حيث وصل عدد الشهداء في داخل قطاع غزة إلى أكثر من 50,000 شهيد، بالإضافة إلى ما يفوق 100,000 مصاب ممن وصلوا إلى مستشفيات القطاع.
بعد 5 ساعات 6 ساعات عملية وما صدق إنه يطلع على الغرفة، يعني إنه عشان يرتاح ويأخذ نقدر إن يسيطروا الدكاترة ويرجع على حالته الصحية كما كانت. فجأة ما بنستأمن وإحنا قاعدين بأمان الله يعني وفيش ولا أي حاجة، نفطن إنه هالصاروخ النازل علينا. رجعت الضباب والظلمة والغبرة والإحجار والإقزاز في قروسنا والتخبيط، إن وصلت لدرجة إن إحنا مش شايفين المريض وين. نص ساعة طلع من العملية إنه رجعت ساءت حالته مرجع العناية لا نفس، ورجع جرحه نزف، ورجع الدم سال وساءت حالته وتبهدلنا، ويعني قسم جراحة يعني مستشفى تنخبط. الرحمة مش بس في المرافقين، الرحمة أقل شيء رحمة في المريض المتواجد معانا، في المرضى المتواجدين في الغرفة. هذه اسمها مستشفى. ليش أنت موجود في المستشفى؟ عشان أنت تتلقى العلاج وتتلقى الحماية وتتلقى الحالة الصحة الجيدة وتتلقى كل حاجة لصحة المريض. يعني إحنا بنناشد أقل إشي، بلاش وإحنا في الشارع المدنيين يحمونا، أقل إشي وإحنا في المستشفى. يعني هو كمان فيش إلنا أمان في المستشفى.
Israel's relentless bombardment of Gaza continues with at least 21 Palestinians killed in attacks across the Strip since the early hours, medical sources tell Al Jazeera. The renewed assault comes hours after Israeli forces bombed the Nasser hospital in Gaza, killing at least 2 people, including Hamas leader Ismail Bahoum. At least 50,021 Palestinians have been confirmed killed and 113,174 wounded in Israel's war on Gaza since October 2023. Regional instability has intensified as Israel battles on multiple fronts, including its ongoing war in Gaza and renewed strikes on Lebanon, while the United States conducts new attacks on Yemen's Houthi forces.
Israeli settlers have stormed a Palestinian family's home in Tel Rumaida, Hebron, establishing yet another illegal outpost in the occupied West Bank, according to Israeli rights group Peace Now. The takeover occurred while the family was away for iftar, the meal breaking their Ramadan fast. When they returned, Israeli soldiers blocked them from approaching their own home, while police refused to file their complaint. The settlers claim to have bought the house, a claim the Palestinian family flatly denies. Smoke rises over southern Lebanon after an exchange of fire endangered a shaky truce. Israeli artillery and airstrikes hit South Lebanon on Saturday after Israel said it had intercepted rockets fired from across the border. Lebanon's state news agency reported a spate of Israeli airstrikes and artillery barrages in the country's war-battered south and several deaths. Lebanon's Hezbollah denied responsibility and said it had no link to the rocket launches. It said it remained committed to the US-brokered November ceasefire with Israel, which ended a year of conflict between the two sides. No group has claimed responsibility for the rockets. Here in Metula, people rushed to shelters after sirens sounded, but soon returned to their daily routines. Saturday's strikes were the first since Israel effectively abandoned a separate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip with Palestinian group Hamas, an ally of Hezbollah. Both groups are backed by Israel's archfoe Iran. Last year's war between Israel and Hezbollah was a spillover of the Israel's war on Gaza. It rumbled across the border for months before escalating into a blistering Israeli offensive that wiped out Hezbollah's top commanders, many of its fighters, and much of its arsenal. The Israeli military said early Saturday it had intercepted 3 rockets launched from a Lebanese district about 4 miles north of the border, which was the second cross-border launch since the truce. Israel said it was looking into who was responsible. The United Nations peacekeeping force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, said in a written statement on Saturday that it was alarmed by the border violence and that a further escalation could have serious consequences for the region.
Ukrainian and U.S. delegations met for talks in Saudi Arabia on Sunday. It's part of a diplomatic push by President Donald Trump to bring an end to Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. Ukraine's defense minister said they discussed proposals to protect energy facilities and critical infrastructure. And in a Sunday evening address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said the day's talks were productive.
Our team is working in a completely constructive manner. The conversation is quite useful. The work of the delegations is continuing.
After speaking with the Ukrainians Sunday night, the U.S. delegation plans to sit down with the Russians on Monday. In an interview with Fox News Sunday, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff was optimistic about that meeting, as well as working with Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war.
This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II, there was no NATO. You have countries that are armed there. To me, it just does. I take him at his word in this sense.
The White House says the aim of the current talks is to secure a ceasefire on the Black Sea, allowing the free flow of shipping. Bloomberg News, citing people familiar with the planning, reported on Sunday that the U.S. hopes to reach a broad ceasefire by April 20th. Trump said over the weekend that efforts to stop further escalation in the Ukraine-Russia war were, quote, somewhat under control. Yet despite all the diplomatic activity, Russia and Ukraine have both reported continued strikes. Ukrainian officials said on Sunday that a large-scale Russian drone attack on Kyiv the night before killed at least 3 people, including a 5-year-old child. Meanwhile, Russian authorities said they had shot down dozens of Ukrainian drones targeting the country's southwest, adding that the strikes had killed 1 person in Rostov. Russian forces have also continued to advance slowly in eastern Ukraine, a region Moscow claims to have annexed.
The Kremlin said today that Russia and the United States had a common understanding on the need to move towards a settlement to end the war in Ukraine, but that there are still many different aspects that need to be worked out. Negotiations in Saudi Arabia between Moscow and Washington are focused on technical issues, including the Black Sea Initiative, which is about the security of shipping in the region, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Peskov continued, "We proceed from that the Black Sea Initiative and all aspects related to the renewal of this initiative are on the agenda today. It was President Trump's proposal and President Putin agreed to it. That was the mandate our delegation traveled to Riyadh with." He added, "In the first place, it is about the safety of ship navigation, but if you remember its initiative, previous form, all of its aspects, there was a rather large part about obligations towards our country that were not fulfilled last time. So, this will also be on the agenda today." The Russian and US delegations are holding talks in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, on settling the crisis in Ukraine on today.
In the latest turn in South Korea's political turmoil, the country's constitutional court reinstated Prime Minister Han Duck-seo as acting president on Monday. He had taken over as acting leader from President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was impeached over briefly imposing martial law in December. Han only lasted 2 weeks in the job before he himself was impeached and suspended. Speaking after the court's dismissal, Han turned to the threat of potential tariffs on South Korea from US President Donald Trump.
저는 대통령 권한대행으로서
As acting president, I will put all my efforts to maintain a stable administration in accordance with the Constitution and laws, and I will use every wisdom and ability to securing Korea's national interests amid the trade war that has already become a reality.
쏟아붓겠습니다.
The ruling immediately returns Han to power after months of political chaos in the country. He thanked the court for its wise decision and the cabinet for their hard work during his suspension. Yoon's martial law declaration plunged the key US military ally into its greatest political crisis in decades. It led to a leadership vacuum amid spiraling impeachments, resignations, and criminal indictments for a range of top officials. Han's impeachment came after clashing with the opposition-led parliament. In the coming days, the Constitutional Court is expected to make a decision on Yoon's impeachment, and if he's removed, an election will be held within 60 days. In the months since Yoon declared martial law, South Korea has been bracing for the potential impact from a range of Trump tariffs. Earlier this month, Trump singled out South Korea for applying high tariffs on US exports. It's already been slapped with duties on steel and aluminum and has been seeking an exemption from the reciprocal US levies set to come next month.
Greenland's leaders have criticized an upcoming trip by a high-profile American delegation to the semi-autonomous Danish territory that President Donald Trump has suggested the US should annex. The delegation, which will visit an American military base and watch a dog sled race, will be led by Usha Vance, wife of Vice President J.D. Vance, and include White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Energy Secretary Chris Wright. Greenland's outgoing Prime Minister called this week's visit a provocation and said his caretaker government would not meet with the delegation. Until recently, we could trust the Americans, who are our allies and friends, and with whom we enjoyed working closely, he told the local newspaper, but that time is over. The Greenlandic government is currently in a caretaker period after a March 11th general election won by the Democrats, a pro-business party that favors a slow approach to independence from Denmark. Jens Frederik Nielsen, leader of the Democrats, called for political unity and said the visit by the US delegation during coalition talks and with municipal elections due next week once again shows a lack of respect for the Greenlandic people. Waltz and Wright plan to visit the Pituffik Space Base, the US military base in Greenland. The White House said they will get briefings from US service members there. They will then join Vance to visit historical sites and attend the national dog sled race. Brian Hughes, spokesman for the White House National Security Council, said the US team is confident that this visit presents an opportunity to build on partnerships that respects Greenland's self-determination and advances economic cooperation. This is a visit to learn about Greenland, its culture, history, and people, and to attend a dog sled race the United States is proud to sponsor. Plain and simple, Hughes said. Trump has made US annexation of Greenland a major talking point since taking office for a second time on January 20th. Greenland's strategic location and rich mineral resources could benefit the US. It lies along the shortest route from Europe to North America, vital for the US ballistic missile warning system. The governments of both Greenland and Denmark have voiced opposition to such a move. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said in a written comment reacting to news of the visit that this is something we take seriously. She said Denmark wants to cooperate with the US, but it should be cooperation based on the fundamental rules of sovereignty. She added that Dialogue with the US regarding Greenland would take place in close coordination with the Danish government and the future Greenlandic government.
New Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on Sunday called a snap election for April 28th, saying he needed a strong mandate to deal with the threat posed by US President Donald Trump.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty.
The comments are a sign of how relations between the two longtime allies and major trading partners have deteriorated. Trump has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods and threatened to annex it as its 51st state.
He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Carney's remarks. Carney, who was sworn in on March 14th, captured the Liberal leadership by persuading party members he was the best person to tackle Trump. The next election was not due until October, but Carney is hoping to capitalize on his party's remarkable recovery in the polls since January. It follows former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation as well as Trump's threats. Earlier this month, Trump delayed a broad 25% tariff on some Canadian goods for 30 days. He has since imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports and threatened reciprocal tariffs on additional goods, including Canadian dairy and lumber, starting April 2nd. Canadians are rallying for their country and seeing a resurgence in nationalism.
And when we are attacked, we stand together.
On Saturday, residents gathered in Toronto to denounce U.S. tariffs. Canada-U.S. relations top the list of issues preoccupying residents, according to recent polls. Carney, a former two-time central banker with no previous political or election campaign experience, now has 5 weeks to win over Canadians. On Sunday, Carney proposed cutting the lowest income tax bracket by 1 percentage point. Polls suggest the Liberals, who have been in power since 2015, have slightly pulled ahead of the official opposition Conservatives, who had led earlier in the year. The Conservatives have sought to portray Carney as an elitist, who plans to continue the Trudeau-era policy of high government spending.
Heathrow authorities defended its decision to shut down operations at Europe's busiest airport last Friday as the blame game intensified over an 18-hour closure. The shutdown cost airlines tens of millions of pounds and stranded thousands of passengers. As questions mounted over how such a critical part of Britain's infrastructure could fail and whether all Heathrow's 4 terminals needed to shut, both National Grid and Heathrow agreed that the failure of the transformer was an unprecedented event. But the airport was forced to defend its closure after the boss of National Grid told the Financial Times that the electricity transmission network remained capable of providing power to the airport throughout the crisis. Heathrow is a private company owned by French investment group Ardian, Qatar Investment Authority, and Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, plus others. Heathrow said the fire at a nearby substation late on Thursday interrupted its operations, forcing it to shut while it reconfigured systems and switched to power from an alternative substation. Hundreds of critical systems across the airport were required to be safely powered down and then safely and systematically rebooted, a Heathrow spokesperson said. Given Heathrow's size and operational complexity, safely restarting operations after a disruption of this magnitude was a significant challenge. John Pettigrew, the CEO of National Grid, said there were 2 other substations able to provide power to Heathrow, showing that the grid was resilient. 2 substations were always available for the distribution network companies and Heathrow to take power, he told the FT, while airlines such as British Airways, the worst affected, add up the bill for the closure. The government and Heathrow have both commissioned reviews into what happened. It's really important that we do learn the lessons from this, and that's why I think those 2 reviews are going to be really critical, Transport Minister Heidi Alexander told Sky News on Monday. Asked on LBC Radio about whether she had confidence in Heathrow's CEO Thomas Waldby, Alexander said she wanted to see the results of the reviews.
We are protesting this authoritarian regime with joy. One of the things that authoritarians like to do is to squash dissent. They like to instill fear. And we have no fear because we are free, we are Americans, we have our First Amendment rights, and we are just coming out with joy and showing other people that they're not alone.
What's happening here is that U.S. citizens are exercising their free speech in a peaceful way to protest what's happening with Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the undermining of our democracy, the cutting of services, the cutting of foreign aid, the cutting of free speech, the threatening of judges.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves told the BBC yesterday she is planning to reduce budgets for the civil service by 15% by 2029. The move could put thousands of jobs at risk, including in communications and policy, human resources, and financial procurement management jobs. She claims frontline service roles won't be affected. Reeves will likely announce belt-tightening measures to get back on track to meet her fiscal rules next Wednesday, when she delivers a half-yearly budget update speech alongside fresh economic and public finance forecasts from Britain's fiscal watchdog. But she is believed to have been knocked off course already by slower than expected economic growth and higher borrowing costs in financial markets. Furthermore, a potential global trade war triggered by US President Donald Trump's import tariffs has led to downgrades to the international outlook. Speaking to BBC's Laura Kuensberg, Reeves also said she wants to see trade barriers come down with the United States and the European Union. In her first full budget last October, Reeves sought to show investors that she could be trusted with the public finances by announcing a rule to bring day-to-day spending into balance with tax revenue by the end of the decade. Asked whether she thinks Britain will be left out of Trump's expected tariffs, the Chancellor said Prime Minister Keir Starmer had a really good meeting with Trump in the White House a few weeks ago.